Can you make money from collecting comics? It's been a part of the comic industry for a very long time, the idea of the collector, the person who's going to amass a library of comics and then one day sell it off for millions and live on that island. Is that possible? Hey, there's this Perch. I've done a video similar to this one some time ago, and I'm going to kind of go to the same premise, but there will be some different aspects to it. Um, Collecting is one of those things that's kind of woven into the culture of comics. The idea that you're going to collect a run and have this kind of valuable long box of comics that you keep and maintain and store and that it's yours and it's something you can pass down to generations or you can one day sell at a comic shop. And that's kind of woven into the mythology, if you will, of comics. And it's in some ways as fantastic and as fictional as the characters in the comics themselves. This idea that these characters in the comics are going on crazy adventures, and that you are part of their adventure, and you're carefully collecting and cataloging it up, and then can one day sell it. Well, it doesn't really work that way, at least not, and it hasn't for some time. I think there's been the kind of gold rush, get it quick, get some wealth, and but usually they're for shorter term things. There's definitely the person who is an art collector or a antique collector, and comics can fit into that zone where you find yourself with a copy of Fantastic Four #1 and it's worth a lot of money, and you have it stored, and you're a different kind of collector at that point. But that requires a different kind of level of hobby. You're not going to go into a comic store, dig through the bins, find that kind of hidden gem, strike a good deal with a comic shop owner, and then 5 years later be like the guy who has Fantastic Four #1. That doesn't happen. Is it possible to buy a comic for $1 and sell it for 125? Yeah, absolutely. You can do things like that. Well, not anymore, but you were able to do that back then. Rob Liefeld's first issue of New Mutants is one of those, or first appearance of Cable is one of those comics that people bought, relatively cheap. It caught on, not immediately. I mean, people were reading the comics, but it wasn't like people knew going in that was going to be a top seller. A lot of the problems with collecting today is that people kind of assume the value or the wealth prior to even stepping foot in the store. They've already got a sense of kind of what's going to work and what's not. That's one of the problems with variants is that you're paying a premium for a variant. There's an expectation it's going to be worth more as a variant down the road. That may or may not be true. In fact, in many cases, it isn't true. At least not to the levels I'm talking about. And so the question goes back to, what are you trying to get out of comics as a collector? Do you enjoy the journey of having a run and putting it in a box and being able to go through all this? Do you enjoy that process? That's a fun process for a lot of people. It's a hobby. It gives people things to do. It takes up inordinate amounts of storage space. It's wonderful, uh, but it's also at the same time, it's not a get rich quick scheme. And I think if you're in it for the money, if you're in it purely to make a profit on something, then there's better ways to do it. Honestly, doing even something as simple as doing reprints of certain characters and certain other things will make you more money over time. But if play the stock market. I mean, there's put your money. Somebody once told me, hey, they were buying comics with the idea of a payout and a return at some point, and their brother was matching the money they were putting into comics by just buying low interest earning CDs in the bank. And the brother was more convinced that he was going to make more money after 10 years than the comic collector. And if there's a good, it's probably a close race, which is sort of sad. But the reason people collect comics is they enjoy the journey. And if you find yourself not enjoying the journey and you're just collecting money for the cash, then there's better ways to make cash. I think that's the key outcome of collectors. I mean, you should be enjoying the process. It should be, personally rewarding to you, because financially rewarding is going to be dubious in this business. Again, not saying it can't happen. There's plenty of people. There's shops that specialize in more back issues. There's plenty of ways you can make money as a collector. Absolutely, but it's just not the best wealth scheme you could do for yourself. There's much better. So don't do it for that reason. And I also think in terms of collecting going forward, you gotta start looking for runs that are not as packaged and marketed to be collector's items, because those tend to not be. So as an example, if you are here, if you read the hype from Marvel about Iron Man 2020, one of the pieces of hype was a sure to be collector's dream. And the reasons being, it was it taps into that nostalgia of the initial 2020 run, and it's gonna be great. Well, the odds are that storyline, that event, first of all, it's going to get collected in trade paperbacks and it's going to be reprinted, and it's the odds of it not being worth a lot of money are high. It's not going to skyrocket up to $100 in 6 months. That's not going to happen. Um, the interesting effect is what it will do to the original Iron Man 2020, the stuff in Spider Man or the original comics that featured Arno Stark. Those are worth some money. I mean, they're older, they're collectors comics, not at the same realm again of like a Amazing Fantasy 15 or something like that, but they're still worth some money. The interesting thing that happens is lately, when a comic does a storyline that kind of taps into those previous issues, those things that are 20, 30 years old, there's a decent chance that the value of those 20, 30-year-old comics actually goes down. When the series is announced, they typically go up a little bit. There's a bump where collectors kind of try to get their hands on it in speculation kind of reasons. But if you look historically, when they do a big storyline, and particularly recently, and part of this is because the company often reprints those old comics, to help boost their event. I don't think that's being done in Iron Man 2020 right now, but I'm sure I am wrong there. I'm sure there's a reprint of those original issues hanging around somewhere that's been pushed out, and I just missed it. But it's interesting how, if you do a new event and you start reprinting the old issues, the value actually tends to decrease to some extent. Not all the way down; they don't plummet, but it has an interesting effect, which is kind of the opposite of what a lot of speculators and collectors were taught to believe for decades. But now things are a bit different. Anyway, there you go. There's my thoughts. Again, my summary here: buy if you love it. Go in as a collector if this is something you enjoy. If the process of collecting comics and reading them and putting them in bags and into the boxes and sorting them all out, if you get enjoyment out of that, if it's something that brings you happiness, then absolutely, be a collector. Go in on this. It's a very rewarding hobby. It's something that feels good. It's something that generationally can be very cool as well. A lot of adults get funny about, well, I can't have my kids anywhere near my collection; they'll ruin it. You can certainly take that stance, but I would argue that you should use this opportunity to connect with your children, to pass down this history. Not just because I want those kids to buy comics in the future, but because it's a great, father to son or father to daughter or mother to daughter or mother to son, whatever it happens to be. It's a great connection point with your kids. It's passing down something that sparks your imagination and your love for a hobby to someone else, and that's one of probably the most rewarding thing of all that could happen with collecting comics is that process of inclusion, of handing down something that's really positive and rich for you. Anyway, there's my thought on the matter. Hope you hope you got some value out of this. Leave me your comments below, especially if you're a collector. Why are you doing it? What are you in for? Are you hoping to get rich? Are you hoping that this is financially what you're after? Let me know your thoughts on the matter. As always, like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.